having a vision, it's actually the solar plexus center which is being activated, not the third eye itself. So it could appear to be the third eye, and in one sense, from a psychic point of view, it doesn't really matter. From an evolutionary point of view, it does matter, you know, if you want to really go beyond psychic powers. And I think he attributed a lot of psychic development to an activation of the solar plexus center.
The Spiritual Freedom Show with Richard Lawrence, where politics is not the answer, materialism counts for nothing, and spirituality will set you free.
Richard.
Darren.
So we've been doing a lot about channeling and about specific telepathy and clairaudience in the last few weeks, and I thought we could take ourselves onto clairvoyance. So another aspect of psychic powers, one that you have a lot of experience with, of course, as well still, and basic clairvoyance being psychic sight. So I was going through Unlocking Psychic Powers and also God's Guides and Guardian Angels, in which I love that you share a lot of fascinating stories, you know, about experiences from your own life that really help to bring these things to life for people, I think, because kind of like vicariously through your own experience, it's kind of like, wow, these things are really real and this is what it's like.
They're real.
But what I found myself sort of like wanting to, I was like, man, I wish I could, you know, if this is another, I wish I could ask more about it, but I have you right here, so I'm going to ask more about it. So today I thought we could, I'd love to dive into a couple of stories that I picked out, and I'll go through those, but I thought we could start just with a little bit of the basics about what clairvoyance really is. And you know, one of the first questions I guess I have just to kick us off is like, just what are you seeing if you're not, you know, are you seeing with your physical eyes, or what is going on when we can see something psychic?
Can I just divert a tad?
Sure.
And come back to that?
Sure.
Thank you. The reason that I wrote Unlock Your Psychic Powers, which, by the way, wasn't my title, and I dedicated the book to Dr. King with his permission, which was a wonderful thing. But the reason I did it was because by then, which was the early 90s, I'd been secretary of the Aetherius Society for, you know, over 12 years. And I started to realize, I had realized that you can't prove things to other people, no matter what you do, really, because of doubt or skepticism or conditioning or prejudice or whatever you want to call it. Even physical demonstrations. We've had one or two physical occurrences, you know, where they're physical phenomena in the Aetherius Society. Not many, but I know of 3 or 4. But even then, to someone who doesn't want to believe it, as poor old Madame Blavatsky found to her cost with her demonstrations, they won't. They'll call you a fraud, they'll say you made it up, they'll come with a convoluted explanation, etc. So I realized the only way you can prove this is to do it yourself. And that was the thinking behind that book and the workshops, which in some ways were more important than the book, because that's where people really experience it.
They get to do it themselves.
So now to come to your question, one of the things that we would do on many of my Unlock Your Psychic Powers workshops was to help people to see the aura. And just not to do a reading of it, just to get a glimpse of it.
I see.
And you know, I had a certain, and still do have a certain technique which can be used, and people, not everybody did. I mean, on those workshops, everybody had some result, pretty much. And they walked out saying, okay, I experienced that. I also saw other people experiencing things, but I experienced this. So I would say maybe 40 or 50%, that's a guess, of the people who tried this exercise did get a glimpse of the aura, which is a form of clairvoyance, which is all I wanted to show people that you can do. So obviously you can go a lot further. So coming to your, whether it's the physical eyes or not, my own view on that is it isn't, but the physical eyes ground you.
I see.
So if you have a clairvoyant experience with your eyes closed, you won't necessarily see what's in your vicinity. You could have
I see.
what
Okay.
might almost be
Yeah.
called remote view. You could
Yeah.
even see something on another realm if you were advanced enough. And I've experienced that, and many others have. I mean, it's not about. Let me stress this. This is not me. I mean, I give some examples that I've experienced, but other people, ordinary people. I've had people come to my class demonstrate, as we mentioned before, psychometry in a way I've never done myself.
Oh yeah.
Outstanding results some people have had who've never done it before in some cases. So this is for everyone, and we're all different. So with clairvoyance, that's, as you rightly say, psychic vision or psychic sight. That's a particular attribute. Now, all the senses, the 5 senses, can be used psychically, even taste. And Dr. King, you spoke about that, and he actually believed that some wine tasters, without even realizing
that's a good example.
were actually doing a form of psychometry or psychic taste in this case, to identify not just a region of a wine, the year of a wine, but the exact location of the place where it was made. Some of the things that they could do, in certain cases allegedly, and maybe they still can, were beyond available information from the physical taste.
Wow.
So, but they thought it was. And likewise, you'll get people in the police, for example, who'll have a hunch. They won't explain what a hunch is. And you'll get people who say, I've got a gut feeling. This lingo is throughout our...
Yeah, it's very common, actually.
Very common,
Yeah.
I'm picking up your thoughts. People say these things without thinking, actually, I'm being psychic.
Yeah.
Well, you are being psychic at that moment, if it's true. That's telepathy. So with clairvoyance, though, to come back to your question, I believe, this is my view of it, is that having the eyes open can help you to, as it were, fix your clairvoyance on a specific in your location. So if you're, for example, wanting to look at an aura, I would do it with your eyes open. But then you'll need to go beyond the physical eyes.
I see.
And that's something I teach people to do on these classes, and some of them get fairly quick results. Yeah.
So, because one of the things that when people talk about clairvoyance, they're often associated with the third eye.
Yeah.
But
rightly
is that true?
It is. Dr. King made he was the man. I mean, he was the master. He was the man. He had it right down. I mean, we're so lucky to have him. And as I've mentioned before, when I was starting to channel and do readings, he helped me. And I made a mistake at one point. He put me right. And so I'm very lucky to have had that training. And he I don't know whether he ever had those experiences himself or not, because he didn't say, of making mistakes and going right. That's where you really learn, and then you never do it again. But he really understood the chakras in a way that I've never known any other person who talks of psychic things or clairvoyance, because he gave a brilliant lecture on developing your clairvoyant powers, which was actually the inspiration behind my book, really, in a way, that concept, which we may come back to, because it's so unusual for a yoga master to be encouraging people to develop their It may be unique. Goes against yoga tradition, as a matter of fact.
Okay, yeah.
And he knew that.
Yeah, I've not seen it elsewhere.
To your question, he said that very often when you think you're looking or through the third eye, you're genuinely having a vision, it's actually the solar plexus center which is being activated, not the third eye itself. So it could appear to be the third eye, and in one sense, from a psychic point of view, it doesn't really matter. From an evolutionary point of view,
you're seeing that.
It does matter, if you want to really go beyond psychic powers. And I think he attributed a lot of psychic development to an activation of the solar plexus center. But from a visual point of view, it could appear to be, I did crystal gazing, and people who, not because of the tradition of crystal balls, actually. For me, it was always a Taoist symbol from the very beginning.
Well, the emptiness.
The emptiness into which all things come, the vacuum.
The vacuum, yeah.
And so I was looking at it very mystically. But, people talk about crystal gazers talk about a kind of a fog coming over the crystal ball when you start to look into it, and then images become clear. What actually I believe is happening is that the eyes start to become blurred.
Okay.
And you stop your focusing through the eyes. And then I'll just put it this way, you move towards the third eye, but it may well be an activation of the solar plexus center.
It's interesting. And so, like in a recent show, you described seeing, I think, Count Cagliostro, who then channeled at that point. So when you were seeing him, I mean, what was, if you explain this as someone who was trying to validate their own experience that they were starting to have of psychic powers and a little bit of clairvoyance that they were beginning to manifest, what could we say that would help them kind of validate that they were really seeing something psychically?
Yeah.
What does it look like?
Yes. Well, first thing I would say is this: is that if you see somebody clairvoyantly, there is a health warning here I should give. I mean, a mental health warning.
Okay. Sure.
That you can become deluded if you aren't careful. And I always come back to these three words: I don't know. Every developing psychic, in fact, everybody, actually, not just a developing psychic, needs those three words. Some psychics don't like to ever use them. That means either the ego has come in, or they have some deluded idea that they think they have to know everything and they can't say, I don't know. You've got to be able to do that. So it could be your imagination. And you don't, so let me say that first. But when you're really starting to have a psychic vision of another individual, like you mentioned Count Cagliostro, he was interested, as a matter of fact, in a book I was writing at the time, which was called UFOs and the Extraterrestrial Message.
Oh, was it?
And actually, he's mentioned in that book. Okay. In another context. He's interested, I believe, in the Aetherist Society anyway, but especially interested in Dr. George King as a master and what he really is. But that's by the by. When you start to see someone, and if you do see them, this is a strange thing, but they could be far more of a presence in the room, if you're in a room, than a physical person in the same room. They are not physical, and it has to be clear on that. They're not on this physical realm anyway, let's put it that way. Very often, in his case, they will manifest in a way that would be identifiable, to us. Okay.
Like something we'd be able to recognize and help us validate afterwards.
And often, it's an impression. It's your impression that you're being given mentally by them, of themselves, or through them, or it's sometimes you can go beyond that. I mean, the way, and this is for an advanced person to go beyond that, of course, is astral projection. And that's a different topic. I'm not recommending this. It's something I'm very interested in. And again, which I discussed with Dr. King more than once. And it's something I applied myself to in the 80s, really trying to do that. But then you are moving to their realm, probably. And then they're just as physical as you are. But that's off topic. Generally, you're getting an impression, degrees of impression, let me call it, of that person, a mental impression of them, which is them, but it's it's them on this realm. So, because they may not be capable of traveling to this realm. So it will depend on the psychic, let me say, how much of an impression it is as against how much of a firm reality it is.
It's an interesting point, isn't it? Because a lot of people, as you've described in the past, kind of present themselves in a way that would be recognized based on how they were, recorded historically and everything else. And I think that that's been the case in some other examples you've described. Yes,
and particularly if you're giving a reading, for example, to someone. And I want to be clear here. I mean, clairvoyance is not my first suit, as it were, as they say. I mean, my first suit is, if people are familiar with that phrase, or the one I'm best at. Is clairaudience, psychic hearing. But it's very, very useful. It doesn't always happen. It could, in my case, it would be probably less than 50% of the time when I'm getting a contact, will there be a clairvoyant impression.
I see. Okay.
But yeah, sorry, I think you asked me a question. I
was just going to come back to that one other point. Actually, you mentioned the other realms of existence. I thought maybe just to give people a little bit of background there. So
yes, sure.
when you're having a psychic vision, you're saying What are you seeing, like on another realm that's also here present at the same place, or are you seeing someone who's like projecting a mental impression onto this realm? Like, what is going on?
It's a fascinating topic, that.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating, which I don't think has been fully revealed.
Okay.
Because what is the difference between somebody, we have different levels. So we have, this level is known as level 1. And then you have other realms. So the higher realms, we won't go bother about the lower realms right now, which shouldn't exist, but they do. But there's level 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So these are levels of frequency. So people inhabit those realms. And those people who aren't clairvoyant can't see them. People do travel sometimes to one of those realms in their sleep state.
Right.
They are there. Now, you have a guide or an individual making contact with a psychic person and being visually present, and the psychic can see them. They are seeing that person on this realm.
I see.
And so it's like a fascinating... The difference with level 1, by the way, is this level, this physical level, that here we have multitudinous frequencies of energy, actually. I mean, the level has a basic frequency, but there are, we've had the likes of a Mozart, a Gandhi, all sorts of, you could name people who've attained very high frequencies of consciousness, and some, unfortunately, attained very low ones, while still being in the physical body on this realm. So there is that difference, whereas you would tend, and some people will leave this body to go to a higher realm, and they did. And, Master Chang Fu, for example, who spoke through Dr. King, is one such example. They would head, understandably, if they wanted to gain real enlightenment or cosmic consciousness or nirvana, to the highest realm that they could attain sometimes. So that was their goal. But so there is a lot to be revealed, I think, and understood about the relationship between, say, someone who's vibrating at a very high level on this realm, this physical realm, and somebody's actually on another realm. So it's a different thing to see an advanced soul on this who's visiting you from a higher realm, or you're getting a vision of, and it can vary. I'm going to come back to that. It can be anything from just an impression that they're giving you of them. It can be what people used to call a vision. Many people who have had visions of the Virgin Mary, visions of Jesus, of St. Peter, and of Buddha, of different beings, Sri Krishna, whoever it might be, doesn't mean they're being visited by that.
I see. There's this between a vision and actually...
So there are many ways that it can happen. But if you are being visited by them, and depending how far you're able to penetrate the reality of their presence, it will be anything from a vague impression of them, which is still quite valuable, all the way through to an actual seeing of them. And it'll also depend whether they're able to come here and visit you or not. So I don't want to make this terribly complicated, but there are a lot of variables in it.
Yes.
But at the end, you are enhancing your... For example, I do believe if you were able to see not through the solar plexus center, but actually through the third eye, it would be very different.
How would you compare the two?
I would say then you're going beyond an impression to reality.
I see.
That'd be my view of that,
Okay. But I mean, it sounds like the bottom line is that most clairvoyance is happening through the solar plexus center, and very rarely are people actually perceiving directly through the third eye.
I wouldn't want to be dogmatic, because there's two centers between those two, and the centers below. And as we've mentioned before, not all psychic powers are used correctly. And they can also be used, sadly, to do harm. And if you take remote viewing, which I touched on, there's definitely been attempts by governments to use that for warfare, to bring psychics into these governments, both in the East and the West, and get them to try and use their remote viewing capabilities and they've also tried to get them to project, according to some papers, use these psychic powers, in other words, for warfare. So if those people were doing that, I don't know how low a chakra they might be using, or even whether they're and this is another issue, but whether it's an activation at the back of the spine or the front. There's many possibilities.
I hadn't considered that, but that's really like weaponizing psychic powers in a negative way.
Absolutely, and of course, if one was to deal with what used to be called the black arts, I don't know whether one can use that now, probably not, but let's say negative magic, let's call it that, or harmful magic. They definitely were quite psychic, and no doubt still are, but activating lower centers in not always up the back of the body, I'm sure.
Yeah, okay.
And they conduct various rituals to do so, but they do gain psychic powers, and they misuse them. That's the difference between psychic powers and intuition. That's why my big advice, other than being able to say I don't know, is to always keep the intuition flame burning.
Yeah, okay.
Your own intuition, your own inner voice. Never stop that, never quench that. That's when I went wrong in the very early beginnings. I was so excited, and it's very exciting. You can to keep awake at night. It's, the first time you have some of these experiences, well, certainly in my case, you can get really high on it, and you can run along with it, and I forgot to keep the intuition flame burning, and that's when some mistakes crept in. So you want to keep that always there and follow that always. That's, if it's a choice, go with your intuition.
Yeah, no, fantastic advice, I think, for people to hear. And just to your point about keeping you awake, I think it goes back to your point about experiencing these things for yourself, because, ultimately, I think that's the point at which you actually really believe. I mean, that's what, for me, when I had some of these experiences, I was like, oh my God, it's actually true.
Yes.
I mean,
yes.
I'm just going to sit here because what else, it's like, that was a game-changing moment, I feel. When it's like, you might believe someone else's experience, but, there is still some deep-seated doubt because you haven't actually done it yourself. But once you do, like you say...
That's why you need to unlock your psychic powers.
Coming back to the top. Fantastic.
That's why, though, because then you know.
Yeah.
And as long as you've done it in a sensible way, and the beauty of everything we teach, and the credit, the 100% of the credit for this goes to Dr. George King, is that it's yoga-based. And that's so different. It could be unique. And I think we may have talked about this before, but the yoga schools, the traditional ones, discourage psychic development. And it even happened to Dr. King when he learned from Dr. Shastri prior to him being contacted by extraterrestrial intelligences as their channel and so forth. When he was learning, and he admired Dr. Shastri greatly, and his sister told me that too, because she was living in London as well. And his centre's still there in Notting Hill in London, Dr. Shastri's centre. He's not, he's moved on, of course.
Sure, yeah.
But Dr. King, though, caused a bit of a stir even there on this very point by basically challenging one of Dr. Shastri's speakers and saying, how can you give up psychic powers or clairvoyant abilities how can you detach from them when you haven't developed them? And that was and actually Dr. Shastri himself later agreed with Dr. King, told Dr. King he was actually right about that. But they still don't teach that. So Dr. King marrying these two, and of course the reason, what's changed? Service. Yeah. That's what it's all about. It's about service. In the old days, it was about gaining enlightenment for yourself.
Therefore,
if that's all you wanted to do, then yes, psychic things will happen, but you detach from them and get back to what you're doing. But if you want to help others, I mean, I have a 10-point, just 10 ways, which I've spoken about, that you can use psychic powers to help others. People have come up to me and said, well, look, I'm very interested in your workshop, but why should I want to develop psychic powers? Because they're seeing it as a selfish thing. And I've turned to them and said, well, then you can help others with it. Yeah. They go, oh gosh, I'd never thought about that.
Yeah. I'm going to come back to you on those 2 points on one of our next shows, because I think there's a lot to unpack there. I think it'll be really, really helpful for people. Just before we close out this one on clairvoyance, though, I'd love to go through just a couple of examples of stories that you shared in your books. And just maybe you can add a little bit more kind of commentary around them or any other insight that wasn't there. The first one here, a story you recounted. I think you were being asked to perform an exorcism in the basement of a building that was formerly a Roman Catholic church. And maybe I can just read a couple short paragraphs here.
Yeah, just to remind me. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. So you said, I walked down the steps with all guns blazing as though marching into battle.
Oh, yes.
As my assistant chanted mantra began to summon the help of the higher forces.
Yes.
I tuned in and scanned the room clairvoyantly. And to my complete astonishment, all I could see was a little old priest in black robes, shivering with terror as he cowered in the corner. And I think some of the preamble there was that the people who'd been working in the basement had been, it was actually some bad vibe they'd been hearing.
They had.
Something
That's
like
true.
that,
Yes.
which had scared them. And
they wouldn't go there. They wouldn't go down.
Really?
I think I might be wrong, and it doesn't matter this one way or the other. It might be a good thing, this. But I think I believe they were Irish Catholics.
Okay.
Yeah, and they wouldn't go in there. So yeah, I do remember that, and it was quite vivid because I felt sorry. This is the thing. People sometimes. These aren't ghastly entities, they're sad, lost people. I mean, years after this, actually, I went to stay in a hotel with Alison, my wife, and some couple of friends in Sicily, actually, which had been a convent, and a very important one. And while we were there, one of my friends wanted to do some mantra in the part of this building that was had been used, for worship and so on.
Sure.
And we did. No other guests were around, and it stirred something up. Yeah. And there was a whole network there of people who were kind of stuck there, who'd been resident there. I say a convent. I think it could have been a monastery.
Oh, monastery.
Monastery. Yeah. I got that wrong. Yeah, and I had a guide at the time, actually, that I mentioned in an article which Dr. King published in Cosmic Voice called Saint Rock. Okay. And he was like, he obviously was canonized by the church, actually not while he was alive, 400 years after his death. While he was alive, he was a heretic. That's typical, I think, of the Catholic Church. But anyway, but he was very venerated by these monks, so he was able to help them. And all this was, I had a sleepless night after that. But again, what came out was not a load of sort of demons, but sad people who were trapped.
Interesting.
Now, to some people, a little bit like on the other side of things, you might, if you were and I'm not picking on Catholics particularly at all, I mean, it could be any religion, but in this case, you might have a devout Catholic who feels a female presence bringing great healing and attributes it to the Virgin Mary, but actually it's not. Mm-hmm. It might be a sister of mercy who's passed on. It could, or it might not be a religious person at all. But that's the conditioning or the thinking process. In the same way, you get some rather sad people who don't like probably this place we were talking about. The priest, it's coming back to me now, who was stuck in there. He didn't want it to be used in the way it was going to be used. And he was wrong. He shouldn't have been there anyway. And he probably benefited from this because he moved on. Not because of what I did, but because of some other guides will then help him to move on. Mm-hmm. But they aren't necessarily like the devil incarnate. They could just be some sad figure who's causing trouble. I remember doing another exorcism or helping a girl who would never leave the house. She just would not leave the house. She was a teenage girl. Her mother asked me to help, and I did. I think they were a West Indian family. Not that really matters, but they were living in London.
All right.
And the girl was like being prevented from going out. Now, this is why you should, by the way, don't try and do exorcisms as a general, and definitely don't do them if you're not psychic. And I know cases of vicars who've come unstuck, trying to help people because they couldn't see what they were dealing with.
I see, okay.
So you need to know. But in this case, again, it wasn't some ghastly person haunting this girl. It was actually her father who had died, who came from another country, didn't like the standards of London and the behavior of particularly teenage boys in London.
To protect his daughter.
And he was actually literally trying to protect his daughter and stop her from going out.
Oh my gosh.
So it wasn't an evil person. It was misguided.
You can understand. Yeah.
And again, the guides came in, talked to him, and then later she did indeed go out. And as far as I know, everything was fine later. But again, it's quite revealing. And this is why you do need, by the way, with psychic things, not only do you need to be psychic, but you need to also again, I come back to intuition, and ideally have some type of counseling ability.
I see.
Because psychic information isn't always helpful.
This is a little spoken about topic, I think.
Yeah, I actually believe all psychic consultants, and I didn't have this training before I became one, actually, and Dr. King set me up as one, but I did have experience of giving guidance to people before then. But I think it would be helpful if all psychic consultants had some counseling training of some kind.
Okay.
But I also think all counselors
other way around.
and all psychotherapists could do well to have psychic training.
Yeah, I think what those stories illustrate for me is actually a combination of different things happening, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, there's the clairvoyant aspect, perhaps even the clairaudient aspect, but also there's, having to interpret this information in a sensitive way for someone who might be involved. And also you mentioned also the help of the guides that were working with you. And I think that was in a couple of these cases too. So yeah, I see what you mean. This is like...
It's a massive subject.
Yeah.
We're just tapping into an enormous topic here now.
I'd love to get into another in a future show about kind of bringing these things together in the most important way that you described in that little story you told earlier, which is actually you can use them to help people.
Yeah, and I'd also say you can't ever really, I'm getting off topic here now, as a little teaser for a future show,
go for it.
You can't really ever, I don't think morally anyway, become an attorney at law, a barrister, if you have a developed intuition. My parents always wanted me to be that, by the way. But I think that is a profession, just one of them, for people who don't have intuition.
Because they were lying.
You would know. See, the whole premise, isn't it, of law is that you don't know, and everybody deserves their defense, so that the truth will come out in the case and so on. All judges really should be intuitive people. But the system, it's not just law, by the way. You have it in education, you have it in other professions, advertising, and you name it, is all predicated on a certain educational academic structure, which if we brought back or brought in metaphysical, mystical thinking, would change all the parameters. There's a teaser.
Thank you very much.
Everybody's down here. Thanks for tuning into the show.
Now, if you enjoyed that episode, don't forget to subscribe for more wisdom from the 9 Freedoms. If you'd like to find out more about the 9 Freedoms, about Mars Sector 6 by Dr. George King, go to our website, that's aetherius.org. Richard and I love hearing from you, receiving your comments, your questions on your spiritual experiences, and talking about them on the show. So do write to us, share them with us at spiritualfreedom@richardlawrence.co.uk. Always remember that service is the jewel in the rock of attainment.